My name is Gabriel Aquiles, and there is something that I would like to tell you. In this video, I want to go into a little bit more detail about my autism, because I haven't yet. Specifically, me sharing to you people my story of how and when did I begin to realize that I was autistic, as well as me sharing a little bit of insight on how I feel with living my life with autism so far. In order to understand when did I realize that I was autistic, we have to first understand when did and how did my parents realize that I was autistic. Because of course, my parents knew about my autism long before me, because that time I was still too young to remember anything. So here's the thing, my parents became aware of my autism shortly after they first brought me to visit Disney World for the first time back in July 2008. That time was only around a couple years old. So what does my first visit to Disney World have to do with my parents realizing that I was autistic, you may ask? Well, you see, during that specific visit, when we were at the Magic Kingdom park, you know that one event that always occurs when the park closes? Yes, the closing ceremony, aka the kiss goodnight, where all the lights dim and the Cinderella castle lighting up with a spoken farewell to the guests. Well, when my parents brought me to experience the closing ceremony for the first time, and as the lights in the park dimmed, I at the time wasn't expecting much, but when the announcer that started the event shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen," my first instinct was that I was startled, because of how scared I was due to me not expecting such a surprise. I was spotted to be crying and running away from my mom, in whom she was holding my hand that whole time. Unfortunately, however, she didn't hold me too tight enough, so I was able to run away that easily. Luckily, one of the visitors found me while my mom was already crying looking for me, and when she did found me, the visitor said to my mom something along the lines of, "I think your son might be autistic." When my mom heard that, this was when she began to consider bringing me to a doctor that will help determine on whether I was autistic or not, to which my mom did bring me to eventually, shortly after that Disney World visit. The doctor that found out and told my parents about my autism had attempted to convince my parents to put me on some sort of medication, something that my parents refused, to which I'm still grateful for to this day. Otherwise, my entire life would have been a whole lot different in a not so pleasant way. My early childhood would have been so much worse, in that I would have been more likely to reset my character, or at least attempt to. The visitor that told my mom about me having a possibility of being autistic, I think they were expecting me to enjoy more the show and feel more excited and amazed by how mesmerizing the closing ceremony was, unlike what I actually felt at the time. Which now leads us to the real question. When and how did I realize that I was autistic myself? In summary, my realization of me being autistic was more of a slower and gradual process, unlike what my parents experienced when they found out as soon as the doctor who diagnosed me told them about it. The very first steps into what made me realize myself that I was autistic was when my parents decided to, at certain times throughout the week, bring me to a nanny when I was still a toddler, and then later my parents enrolling me in pre-K, a while after I turned 3 years old back in 2009. The decision my parents made to put me in pre-K, something that I'm also grateful for. That way I was able to, in one way or another, start interacting with the other peers and staff around me and begin to form relationships with them, as well as the support that I needed whenever it came to me learning anything. Unfortunately, at first this was not easy, as the pre-K teachers that I had used to at times notify my parents about the weird noises I would sometimes make in class, as well as the persistent habit of me eating paper. Yes, that's right. Since during my pre-K days, I've been always eating things like paper, plastic, rubber bands, pencil grips, graphite, and paper clips too. Despite these issues, I got my ABCs, days of the week, and months down like usual, just like every other pre-K would do, and me learning how to use a PC for the first time too. This was all during the time frame of August 2009 to around June 2011, when my time in pre-K concluded. The next step in terms of me realizing that I was autistic was from when I was in kindergarten and first grade. In that time specifically, it was almost as if I had like three different teachers at once. One teacher I had was the lady teaching the regular class, along with all the other students. Another teacher I had were the ladies that supervised in a special classroom that I was placed in alongside the other groups of students around my age that were also special needs children. Most of the other students that were placed in the special needs classroom alongside me, they were much more autistic or at least much more slower to learn than I was at the time. The other teacher that I had was a speech therapy teacher that would often pull me out of my regular classes at certain days throughout the week, mostly occurring right before the end of my school classes for the day. That same speech therapy teacher that I had in kindergarten and first grade would continue to pull me out of my regular classes for me to see her for the remainder of my time in elementary school. The special needs teacher that I had in my earlier years of elementary school, however, I would stop seeing on a regular basis beginning in second grade, as the administrators in my school determined to my parents that I was fit enough to be going to my regular classes full time, while anyway still meeting with my speech therapy teacher in those remaining elementary school days too. The biggest issue that I ever had from my days in elementary school were the fire drills that were conducted throughout the entire campus grounds, which were always occurring without any sort of prior warning, and because of how loud and bright the Edwards speaker strobes and Edwards integrity alarms were to me, I would always be the only one screaming and crying every time these god-forsaken fire alarms would go off, because of how sensitive I was to such events. But what about every other student around me? Quiet as a mouse, walking in a single file lines like they're supposed to, not running like I used to in those days. The only time that I wasn't scared of the fire drills was when the fire alarms did not go off for real, yet me and my classmates still be instructed to anyways go outside, like we're supposed to on any other given day of a fire drill. All while one of the school admins blasted out loud, "Girl on Fire" by Alicia Keys on the speaker. Anyways, other problems that I had from my days in elementary school, which I feel are also worthy of being noted, was me blurting out inappropriate words and blurting out random phrases as I'm making incomprehensible noises at the most inappropriate times in class. For example, back when I was in first grade, when I was playing around with the educational globe that the teachers provided for us to play with, I was so flabbergasted with the African countries of Niger and Nigeria, to which you might have guessed already, and you are correct, I pronounced these countries' names incorrectly, and my teacher would often call me out for being inappropriate, or the times when I would scream "Choco, Choco, Choco," while everyone else is quiet in the class. Yes, and the numerous times my parents would often scold me for my behavior, as a result of the emails that my parents received from my teachers complaining that I would do other forms of misbehavior, such as me putting my hands underneath my pants, me putting my arms and legs inside my shirt, and curling up like a ball whenever I felt cold or whenever we were practicing the occasional lockdown drills, me having trouble with staying on task during my independent work, and only being able to concentrate on my assignments only when I was in groups, me going to the bathroom most of the time without my teacher approving of me to use the restroom on the basis of me not reading well, whether the teacher would let me use the restroom or not, as I thought he would, and often being pulled out of class to go to another one as a result of it. And last but not least, from the time when I used to be in third grade, where I'd struggled the most in my reading comprehension. So much so that I was almost held back a grade and that I had to go to summer school elsewhere in order for me not to get held. It was during this time when I had to see two other teachers at once at one point, in the desperate attempt for me to not fail and get held back a grade. One of those special teachers that I met had brought me to the administrative room at times and made me learn how to use Microsoft Office for the first time, especially with Microsoft Word. So yes, I basically learned and started becoming knowledgeable about how to use Microsoft Office. Quite a while before many of my other classmates would later during my middle school and high school years. The other teacher that I had was to help me better with my reading comprehension during my third and fourth grade years and would often pull me out of my regular class because of how low my reading performance was at the time. In terms of writing, I wasn't really that great either. Most of the time, when my teachers were grading the classwork that I was given on paper, they would have a hard time discerning what I wrote in my papers, even as far as how badly I would write my own name down every time I was given these papers. The solution that one of my special teachers had for me was that in the majority of the assignments that I had to do on paper, I will be given an iPad for me to use some sort of app. I don't really remember the name of what the app was, but that app my special teacher made me use was for creating documents where I could take the picture of my paper, then annotate it, and then type my answers down on the image. That way I would get my grade. In a more positive note now, my parents back in those days, from when I was in elementary school, used to make me see an occupational therapist to further help me with my social skills and physical skills, which I had been struggling with throughout my entire time in elementary. I remember on several days my occupational therapist would get me to read passages and quiz me on them so I could better formulate my reading comprehension, as well as me often seeing her bringing her dog to therapy in a way that will help me better with my social skills. And eventually, after I adopted my dog Nick, will be for the remainder of my time spent going to occupational therapy, I will be bringing my own dog to therapy when he was still a puppy, of course, further helping me develop better the basic social skills that I needed to have throughout my earlier phases in life. By the end of fourth grade was when my school determined that I no longer needed to go to occupational therapy every time after school. And that's when my parents started putting me in summer camp, which also helped me with formulating my social skills even more, as well as the discipline and behavior that I would soon be developing during my next few years in secondary education now. Especially because in middle school, my parents had signed me up to do taekwondo after school. Yet even from there, however, I would have similar issues, again similar to what I had in elementary school, with me not only putting my hands in my pants for whenever I felt the need to use the restroom, but also because I hadn't done much effort to satisfy my martial arts instructors whenever it came to self-defense, or my kicks and punches, or that I was too lazy and had a hard time memorizing what to do. Similar problems with following my trainer's instructions I also dealt with from when my parents used to put me in swimming classes every weekend back in elementary school, with me not being able to swim properly, and deal with the fact that I had to get used to having pool water in my ears. And the time when I was doing soccer practice, I had often had issues with me not putting the hands on the soccer ball when playing. That alongside me having joined Roblox at a very early point in my life, as I feel that I should have joined Roblox much later in life. Within the greater metaverse of Roblox, during my elementary and middle school years, I too was also blurting out random words and sentences which made no sense towards other players, as well as me getting involved in dramas that I didn't need to be involved in. The constant recordings of the same series of games that I played on Roblox over and over again. That in conjunction with my years-long unhinged obsession towards the tablet, especially with apps such as Angry Birds and Where's My Water, and the fact that during elementary school I had 20 different real-life friends to interact with that number decreasing from time to time as I got older. Those were all the factors that had to do with me eventually realizing that I was autistic. The very final steps that I had experienced into what made me realize fully that I was autistic was during the majority of my time in middle school, right up until the period from when COVID-19 peaked and that we were all set into quarantine and that we had to learn from home. During my time in middle school was when I had an unhinged obsession towards the game of Splatoon 2, even going as far as making fan fictions and artwork out of my Splatoon 2 Inkling character. The artwork which would later spawn my interest in the world of graphic design, as well as me learning how to draw and learning how to do graphic design, which is an inspiration which indirectly was an inspiration for my career, along with other factors. Anyways, the habits of me eating paper and blurting out random words at the most inappropriate times indeed did continue to occur as my middle school days went by. But what was more troubling in these middle school days was the frequent lunch detentions that I was given, due to minor incidents such as me pissing outside of the toilet bowl and getting kicked in the testicles despite it not being my fault, or me trying to stop one of my classmates from running around in the school courtyard, and the frequent fightings that I had with other classmates around me that I felt uncomfortable with. One time, me being put in a disciplinary Saturday school because I hit another classmate that I felt was threatening me. Another time, me being put in school suspension for one day alongside the student that I fought with after punching them in the face. And another time when I had a verbal altercation with another classmate, which resulted in me being put in a teacher administrative detention. Also around this time was when I developed thoughts about resetting my character in real life. Specifically thoughts about me forcibly drowning myself, or by falling off from a very high place without a parachute on purpose. It got so bad to the point where one of the cops from my school had to jump in and talk me out of it, alongside numerous other behavioral counselors that have discussed this with me prior. So yes, during my middle school years, this was when I finally realized this cold hard truth, that not everyone's gonna like me the same way, not everyone's gonna hate me. In fact, not everyone in the whole wide world knows who I am even. And this was literally the entire reason why I've been in this defensive phrase that whole time, and also marks my transition into adolescence. And of course, yes, even during my middle school years, yes, I will continue to be pulled out of class so that I would see my speech therapist certain times throughout the week, mostly which occurred now during the middle of the day. And yes, I was still getting scared every time the fire drills happened. Only not as much as I was during elementary school. And of course, I would still eat paper in plastic like I used to in elementary school and pre-K. And then by the time quarantine began, and as soon as I transitioned into remote learning for the remainder of 8th grade, and throughout the entirety of 9th grade, was when I finally fully became aware of my autism, and my coming to terms to fully accepting for who I am as a person. And the rest is history. Now, what I want you people to realize is that just because I'm autistic, it does not mean that autism is silly and fun and games and these kind of things. Unlike what some groups of people like retro slop cornballs, for example, may think. You have to also take into consideration, please, the struggles of an autistic person whenever it comes to learning and developing the brain, the social skills, how they feel in terms of emotions, what they are interested in life, and how they are displaying that interest, and the behaviors that they display to others, whether that be in a good way or a bad way. The behaviors that I display to other people, which I believe stem from my autism, have to do with me talking to others in a distinct manner different from the others around me. Me oftentimes being afraid to make eye contact with others whenever we are talking to each other. By that I mean looking to the side or up or down from the person speaking to me. Me running around the house idiotically every time my favorite songs play on my phone, or the weird repetition of noises and faces that I make. This is something that I've displayed to all you already in some of my previous videos. In relation to this autistic behavior, most of the time whenever I'm invited to a family gathering, I would just say a simple hi. Stay quiet in one secluded area of the house for the majority of my time visiting, eat, and then saying bye. Basically, in short, just me being somewhat of an introvert and shy person in general. Now, for those who care what kind of personality I am an INFJ. The advocate. Anyways, to any of you autistics that are watching this video, hello and welcome. I know that every autistic person behaves differently and has obsessions different than mine, and that it would be very difficult for me to relate from me to another autistic person, or at least that's just how I feel. And to finally conclude this off, I just want to say that ever since I realized that I was autistic, I have since begun to appreciate myself more for who I am as a person, and how grateful I am to be alive, and that I've learned so much from my experience with autism and my earlier childhood. Despite all that, I will continue to learn even more about what autism is in all terms and how other people would view the concept of autism. Thank you all for watching this video and listening to my story on when and how did I become aware of my autism. I hope you enjoyed it. If there is anything that you would like to add to this video discussion, please let me know under my YouTube comments. So anyways, that's all I have to say here. So therefore, finally, goodbye for now.